What if the most powerful agreement in modern history was never voted on, never announced, never fully explained to the public? What if the rules that decide who gets money, who pays interest, and who survives financial crises were locked in by a quiet deal made during moments of fear when ordinary people were too distracted to notice? We're taught that governments control money, that banks simply lend it, that debt is a consequence of poor choices. But what if that story is backwards? What if governments no longer own their money systems, only rent them? What if that single shift changed the direction of history? Tonight, we're uncovering the silent deal between governments and banks that changed everything. Setting the stage before the deal. To understand the deal, we have to go back to a time when money worked very differently. For most of history, governments issued money directly. Coins were minted by states. Paper notes represented claims on real assets, gold, silver, land, or future tax revenue. Money was imperfect, but one thing was clear: the state controlled its own currency. Banks existed, but they were utilities, not architects of the system. They safeguarded deposits, facilitated trade, and sometimes failed. When they did, they disappeared. Then something changed. The industrial age required massive funding: railroads, wars, factories, empires. Governments needed more money than taxes could provide. Borrowing became normal. Banks realized something critical. If governments needed money, and banks could create credit, then power was shifting. But the deal didn't happen all at once. It happened during emergencies. Origins: the birth of the silent deal. The first versions of this deal appeared centuries ago. But its modern form took shape in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Wars were expensive. Empires were overextended. Tax revolts were common. Governments faced a choice: raise taxes and risk rebellion, or borrow quietly and postpone the pain. Banks offered a solution. They would finance government spending not with existing money, but with credit created through lending. Governments would grant banks special legal protections, guarantee repayment with public taxes, allow private institutions to influence money supply, and crucially pay interest forever. This was the unspoken bargain. Greater than we will fund your state today. You will bind future generations to repay us. No referendum, no public debate. Just legislation written in technical language. The silent deal was born. The rise. How the deal became the system. Once central banking structures were formalized, the deal scaled globally. Central banks were presented as neutral referees, independent, technical, boring, but behind the scenes, they acted as bridges between governments and private finance. Here's the key shift. Governments stopped issuing money directly. They began borrowing it instead. Every new unit of currency entered circulation as debt. This meant money supply expanded only if debt expanded. Governments paid interest on their own currency. Banks profited simply by creating loans. Crises became opportunities. The more governments borrowed, the more dependent they became. And then came the breakthrough moment. The breaking point, when the deal locked in the Great Depression, World War II, the collapse of the gold standard, the financial crises of the late 20th century. Each crisis deepened the deal. During emergencies, rules were suspended. New powers were granted. Temporary measures became permanent. The final lock-in came when money was fully detached from physical backing. Once currency became pure confidence, control mattered more than value. Banks didn't just lend money anymore. They defined what money was. Governments, meanwhile, became managers of debt, not issuers of wealth. From that moment on, economic growth required more borrowing. Political promises required more credit. Stability required constant intervention, and failure was no longer allowed, because if banks failed, the system failed, and governments had guaranteed the system. Fallout: who won and who paid the silent deal had consequences. At first, they were subtle. Debt levels rose, but growth masked the cost. Inflation eroded, savings quietly. Wages lagged behind asset prices. Then the patterns became impossible to ignore. Financial crises punished workers, not institutions. Bailouts saved balance sheets. Not livelihoods, profits were privatized, losses socialized, risk was rewarded, caution was penalized, governments were trapped. They could not let banks fail. They could not stop borrowing. They could not reverse the system without collapsing it. The deal had flipped power upside down. States no longer commanded money. Money commanded states. Failed fixes why reforms never work every few decades. Reform is promised. New regulations, new oversight. But notice something strange. The core mechanism never changes. Banks still create money through lending. Governments still borrow it with interest. Debt still grows faster than economies, because the system cannot survive without the deal. Ending it would mean shrinking the money supply, writing off unpayable debts, breaking political promises, exposing decades of illusion, so instead, the system patches itself. Lower interest rates, quantitative easing, digital money, bigger balance sheets. Each fix buys time, never resolution. Modern parallels, the pattern repeats. Look around today. Global debt is higher than ever. Governments owe more during booms than past recessions. Central banks intervene routinely, not exceptionally. Emergencies justify expansion. Expansion creates fragility. Fragility demands rescue. The same deal. Over and over. Technology changes. Language changes. The structure does not. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The reveal, what the deal really did, the silent deal, didn't just change finance. It changed time. Future labor was pledged to pay for present promises. Children were taxed for decisions they never voted on. Democracy became constrained by debt ceilings, bond markets, and interest rates. Politics became performance. Economics became management, and the real decisions moved out of sight. Not because of conspiracy meetings in dark rooms, but because incentives aligned quietly. 3 clear takeaways. Takeaway 1. Money is not neutral. Whoever controls its creation controls the system. Takeaway 2. Debt is not just economic. It is political power extended across time. Takeaway 3. Crises are not accidents. They are pressure points where systems reveal their true design. Final warning and open thought: the most dangerous systems are not enforced by force, but by dependence. As long as governments cannot function without borrowing, and banks cannot function without expansion, the deal remains intact. The question isn't whether it exists. The question is how long it can continue before the cost becomes impossible to hide. Call to action: if this changed how you see money, debt, or government power, share this video. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into the hidden architecture of financial systems. And ask yourself, quietly, if money shapes reality, who should really control it?